KC Laboratory. Sponsored by Emprise Bank.
It's the KC Laboratory presented by Emprise Bank. When was the last time you went into a bank? Now more than ever, who you're doing business with is more important than where they're located. Emprise Bank is a trusted business partner that can serve anyone, anywhere. They served the KCSN draft guide, and it was, I haven't got to be on this show since the draft guide launched, but I checked my mail today. I got a handwritten letter from Emprise Bank and a bunch of people, wonderful people over there, just congratulating the launch. And so I'm just telling you, they're wonderful people. Shout out my guy, David Bates, for helping with that. Yeah, they're incredible, man. Like it warmed my heart. It felt good. So shout out to them, our partner Impossible, Emprise Bank member FDIC. It's been such an honor to be working with them. And I am honored to be back with these two dorks. First, find them on Twitter at Maddie_KCSN.
Hang on, we're revolting.
I don't like this.
Happening.
Okay, so Craig, we'll just want to run this back like it's last week. We can just not throw it to him, and we can just pretend he's not
the
here.
Entire
Tucker,
podcast.
Mute Kent's feed. We'll just go with us two. It's kind of nice to have you back, Kent. We were having good conversations last week. Things flowed perfectly swell for 58 and a half minutes both times. So, we're doing good. But yeah, thanks for coming back, buddy. Craig, how are you?
Yeah, I'm doing great. I was doing a lot better before Ken introed us. My goodness. Man, we are this close to the NFL draft, fellas. We are so close. It feels so far away. I know. It feels forever away, but realistically, we're just a couple of weeks away. We're ready to see if the Chiefs trade away all of these assets for veteran players in the next 2 weeks, or
can I be honest? I'm nervous. Like every day I'm nervous. I'm like, what draft capital is Veach going to trade away today? Like what is going to happen? How many, are we going to even have a first when it's all said and done? Or
rogue hypothetical that I have not brought by your guys' attention a single time yet. And this would go entirely against Steve Spagnuolo, but what would you give up for Brian Burns?
So what would I give up for Brian Burns?
Yeah,
A one.
let's say
the
Panthers are sitting there and they're saying, hey, his contract's about to come up. We don't know if we're going to want to pay him what he's going to ask while we try to find a quarterback, or Matt Rule does whatever Matt Rule does, and he becomes available. What are you giving up for Brian Burns?
A one. Easy.
That's it? Just you think 29?
I mean, I'm going to start with pick 29, and we'll see what happens from there. No, pick 30. We get to keep pick 29. Thank you.
I think 29 is the answer, just because I don't think he's got 2 years left on his deal, 1 year left on his deal, and then the 5th year option. So you're paying for 2 years of cost control by Brian Burns, and next year it'd be like $16 million. I just looked it up. Yeah, 29. Yeah. But we all know there's no chance of that happening. He's too athletic.
How do you feel about doing that, Kent? Because you've been very loud about hating the idea of trading away picks for veteran players. So Brian Burns comes available. The Chiefs offer up pick 30 and the later 4th round pick to get him, and they make that trade. What do you think? Yeah, you've been very vocal about hating trading for veteran players still. So I'm just curious where you stand.
Yes, I understand, and like you're absolutely right.
I know
Brian Burns is Brian. That's why you're a dork. Brian Burns turns 24 in a couple weeks.
Oh, of course this is going to be an age thing. I should have known that he was going to bring age.
He's younger than Boy Mafe, by the way. Just going to throw that out.
Yeah.
He's going to lob that out to the sunset.
He's like, he's the same age as some of these guys out here in this class.
And he's good. He's shown it at the NFL level, which is why Spagnuolo may look the other way. We've seen him look the other way for guys that have proven it in this level. And yeah, he doesn't fit all of the Spags thresholds, but man, go get me that guy. He's got juice. Like,
what if this is a Veach? What if this is a Veach move? We know Veach. We've heard stories in the past about Veach just throwing it out on the table when he was with Philly for Fletcher Cox, LaShawn McCoy, Patrick Mahomes with the Chiefs. You probably don't hear about the ones that he's missed. So I'm sure there's been other guys that haven't turned out as good, that the same things happen. But when Veach wants a guy in different places he's been, he's kind of made it happen. So what if this is just one of those things where that was his guy? They had no chance to get him. Now they do. Just the reason I bring it up is the Panthers guy did an interview for the Panthers kind of website, just the main CarolinaPanthers.com kind of website. And all of a sudden, Brian Burns' name was just brought up out of the blue about a guy that they got to start thinking about his contract and what they want to pay him. Of course, they would like to. They want him to come back. But the way it was brought up was completely out of nowhere, not provoked, like nobody hinted at bringing it up. And all of a sudden, Brian Burns' name started coming out of this guy's mouth, along with the defensive end position. It was either a smokescreen about them wanting to draft a quarterback, which is entirely plausible, or Brian Burns, maybe there was something there. That's just the only thing that made me think about it.
I mean, the team would be massively better at defensive end. They could really get after the passer with that group of guys. So I would be ecstatic with that, especially if you're just giving up one first. Because then all of a sudden, my desire to actually, move up, draft a defensive end, like he's one of those blue chipper defensive ends that you would be be packaging, 29 and 50 to move up for a guy in the teens. Instead, you're just giving up 30 because I'm not giving up 29. You're giving up 30 and you're able to get a blue chip pass rusher. It's still on his rookie deal. So yes, please.
He'd be the exception by weight. I mean, like his weight would be the exception because I believe he has the arm length and the height and all that stuff. It's the weight. And I think he's playing like supposedly around like 250-ish. I just remember pre-draft process, it was like 230, 225. Everyone was worried about if he was going to be able to put on weight. I think we even had that conversation. Can this guy hold weight? Can this guy maintain weight to be kind of appealing to a guy like Steve Spagnuolo? And I mean, he can't. I don't know. I don't really know what he plays at anymore. If he's kind of filled out enough to where it's like a real level of, high weight maintenance. But
I wouldn't say he's a good run defender. I would not go out on a limb and say that he's a high end or even a quality run defender. So like it would be an interesting, one, I'll be very clear. This is a random hypothetical. I don't want anyone's hopes getting up. We were just on the topic. I figured I would drop it on these guys out of nowhere. And it was a fun player to talk about. And then I wanted to press Kent about his hatred for trading for good players.
24 years old. He's not even 24 years old yet. And he's at the exact same number of sacks aren't everything. He's got the same number of sacks as Chris Jones over the last 3 years. So just an interesting
same number of playoff sacks too.
Probably. Well, yeah, because okay. Well, that's depressing. 25.5 sacks though for Brian Burns in his very very good, kind of quiet. So I don't think he gets enough love. We loved him in the KCSN draft guide, which released on Wednesday, by the way. If you're watching this, you like what we're doing. If you like the draft, if you're listening, you can go click on the link down in the description to purchase the KCSN draft guide, which has released. This is my first episode of the lab back with these guys since that happened. So that was really cool. Thank you guys for all the support, and it means a lot. Really does. You have no clue how much it means. And thank you for all of your support. So, okay. Let's go into, we're going to talk some more CLIFFS again, right? I think you guys started doing this. I listened back to the show, by the way, and it was extremely good.
Okay. Well, hang on. You obviously didn't listen all the way through for all the slander that we put at the end. So I'm glad you listened though, buddy.
And why are you surprised that it was good?
So me calling you a dork was warranted?
Mm-hmm.
Oh wow! Maybe I need to listen closer. I was driving home from the airport, and I listened the whole way because KCI is 55,000 miles away from my house. But let's talk a little bit about some CLIFFS again. I think we're going to talk about the wide receiver position a little bit today. I think you guys have been talking a lot. We've been talking a lot about receiver. You guys talked a lot last week. Here's the thing: wide receiver is crucial to the story of the Kansas City Chiefs offseason now. Tyreek Hill's on the way out. They get a load of draft capital for him. Now the Chiefs are looking to solve the problem. So it's warranted that we spend some time because all the questions we get are about wide receiver anyway. So deep wide receiver class, very interesting wide receiver class. Maddie, what you think?
So when you start looking kind of like, let's not go into the CLIFFS yet, I guess. Wide receiver class as a whole. There's some good talent at big wide receiver. Like, I think that's something that was missing from the last couple drafts. Besides Jamar Chase, you haven't had, and he wasn't even massive. He was just very thick.
He's not built. Drake London.
Yeah, you have a fair amount of really big wide receivers in this class, and they kind of come in all sorts of different styles. But I think that's the first thing that stands out to me is just like, I don't know if the wide receiver class as a whole is as good as you've got in the past 2 to 3 years. It's talented. I don't know if it's as good as the last couple, but I do think you have a certain type. Anybody looking for a big contested catch, kind of like alpha, strong wide receiver, there's some guys in this class that probably are really going to appeal to you. So like, that's the first thing that jumps out about me about the wide receiver class as a whole. Is there anything that jumps out to you, Craig?
It's fully physicality. with teams shifting to more lighter personnel, 11 personnel and stuff like that, we've seen the way that the Rams have utilized just incredibly good blocking wide receivers in their run game against light boxes. This is a draft full of guys like that. I think we're going to see a lot of guys that come from the McVay tree or are trying to build some of the stuff that's off of the McVay tree, targeting a lot of these guys in the draft this year. So yeah, it's pure physicality coming out of this group, and it's something that fits with the Chiefs as well. So that's a nice kind of sync up that has happened with the draft this year.
I don't know if there's like a middle. It's either you are a smaller slider receiver or you're a giant. Like there's not, like, you say build your receiver room like a basketball team. There's not a ton of small forwards. There's a lot of smaller combo guards and bigs, because you're talking about, yeah, we've got all these big physical dudes, these massive, huge. You're absolutely right, and some really quality athletic profiles too. But then the flip side of that, the Jameson Williamses, the Chris Olaves, the John Mechie's. Oh, Mechie's a little bit bigger. Sky Moore. They're not like these massive dudes either. Like, and some of these are in the 170s and 180s that I'm talking about here. So it's like the polarization of this group with both sides of it. It's just, you've got some really small slider guys, but then you've got these absolute giants. There's really no kind of great in between there, I don't think. And so, like, I think that's kind of interesting too. There's like, especially, I mean, if you could probably, if you were gonna go look at like the top 10 or 15 of the KCSN draft guide, you're gonna really put both of those in one of those boxes. And I think that's really interesting about this class too.
Yeah, I mean, this is the hardest part. So just even going to wide receiver needs for a team, and like when you start doing something like the draft guide or talking prospects, it's hard from the outside because wide receiver is such a scheme specific, and then also like your position inside the position specific thing. What I mean by that is a team looking for an X wide receiver isn't really going to care as much about a Sky Moore, a Jahan Dotson, a Jameson Williams, because they're not going to be able to do what they're asking to do. So there's a chance that despite the fact that those guys are really good wide receivers, if you're looking for an X wide receiver to play on the line of scrimmage, be a contested catch, work over the middle of the field, beat press coverage guy, those guys don't factor in whatsoever. So like that doesn't necessarily make it a weaker wide receiver room or group. It just makes it hard to judge. It's like, that's the first issue you kind of have to approach when you look and you start stacking up a receiver, is you got to start putting them into buckets. And I usually use, I have like your X receivers, you have your deep threats, your guys that play in the slot, and then a couple guys that do a little bit of everything, or usually they're just kind of their slot and Z guy together. But here's the question I really wanted to pose to you guys. How many receivers in this class do you think by year 2, not even just say year 1, but by, the end of next year, are going to be a true number 1 wide receiver, or a kind of high end number 2 wide receiver? Like Adam Thielen or better. By the end of next year, the current rendition roughly of Adam Thielen, to where they're a really high-end number 2. How many receivers in this draft class do you think are on that trajectory by the end of 2023?
By the end of 2023, 6 or 7. I know, and I feel like I'm high there, but I mean, looking over the list here, like Pickens, London, Williams, Olave, like Burks, that's 5. Garrett Wilson, like you only got to add another guy that fits in there, whether or not, that's Mechie or, Sky Moore, Christian Watson. Like there's a lot of guys like that could fringely make that transition a little bit quicker by the end of year 2. So like, I feel pretty confident saying 6 or 7 is kind of in the sweet spot there.
I think so. I think that's fair. And like we talked about the bigger names, but like there's still some talented guys that could wind up being that dude in a certain situation. And situation matters. Like I think that's the thing, is like you look at all these receivers, like some of these guys are probably going to disappoint because they go to the wrong team. And like I know that's an easy cop out, but I think sometimes that really does matter. Like I think George Pickens, if he has a better quarterback this year, for example, we're probably talking about him a little bit differently across the board here. But I think situation matters for some of these guys. I think, like you could see, if Kyle Phillips gets on one of these great teams and he's a guy that's I mean, would it stun you if this guy's an uber productive, kind of slot superstar? I wouldn't be stunned. I mean, I'm not going to go out and bet on it, but
in a McVay offense, he used to be lead blocking for UCLA. Like, I mean, they're going to use him in so many creative ways. as a run blocker, as a pass catcher, and he's perfectly capable. So yeah, I could see him being extremely successful in an offense like that. Yes.
So I'm going to take the opposite stance. I think you guys are both kind of high here. I mean, Adam Thielen last year had 900 yards and 2 years ago, 900 yards and 14 touchdowns. Followed that up with 700 yards and 10 touchdowns. That's a pretty high bar to clear for 7 guys by year 2. That hasn't happened the past 3 years. Like, think about how many good receivers have come in. That hasn't happened. And now all of a sudden we're kind of setting, our estimate or like our predictions for this year to come in that high. And I don't think this class is as good as the last couple ones. So for you guys, like, it looks like you're looking at about like a 6, 7, 8 is the first cliff for receiver. So you guys are kind of thinking that Pickens, London, Williams, Olave, for the KCS and draft guide, you got Mechie and Burks in there. And then maybe a Sky Moore. Like, that's a group that goes up at the top because you think those guys might develop quickly into this kind of top tier guy. And for me, I think it's a lot lower of a group. Like, I think I'm looking at 4 or 5 guys that I think are going to come out by the end of next year and be that good. And I think that leans into my concern is that there won't be a receiver of that caliber there for the Chiefs to pick. Like, that's where I'm coming from. It's like, go ahead.
My only counterpoint to all this is, yeah, I get what you're saying. But I just got done saying situation matters. And if one of these guys winds up in Kansas City, he's in the best situation in the world. I think, there's
Is he without Tyreek Hill? Is he having to deal with being, one of the focuses of the opposed? That's why I'm saying it, because you're now not going from being isolated one-on-one on the backside of a route because 3 guys are paying attention to Tyreek Hill. You now have equal attention paid to you as Juju Smith-Schuster and MVS. Like, what does that now look like?
Do you think that one of these guys within year 2 could have 700 yards and 3 touchdowns in the Chiefs offense?
Yes.
Do we think that that's a reasonable thing to expect there?
Yeah.
Well, that's
100%.
basically what McCole Hardman did this past year. So, I mean, with Tyreek Hill gone, spreading it around a little bit more, Travis Kelce still getting his volume targets, Patrick Mahomes, they're not going to be force-feeding Tyreek Hill anymore. They're going to be spreading some of the love around a little bit. So I think that it is reasonable to expect in that 700 to 800 yard range for a lot of these guys. Now, of those guys you listed, speaking of cliffs, since that's what we're talking about here, I think there's a very clear 4 near the top of this. 4, maybe 5 here. Drake London, Jameson Williams, Chris Olave, and you're talking, Garrett Wilson. Those are probably the first 4 wide receivers off the board right there. I think fairly comfortably we can say that. I know we're not as high on Garrett Wilson in the KZ draft guide, but he's going to go that level of high. Then after that, we're talking about, George Pickens, Treylon Burks, Christian Watson, Sky Moore, guys like that I think are a tier down from the rest of those guys, at least in the NFL's mind. And it may be that those top 4 guys are the 4, Matty, to your point. Those are the 4 guys that you could reasonably expect to be in the Thielen range, for lack of a better term. So I don't necessarily disagree. I can just see paths to success for those guys. Like Kent was saying, paths of success to get to that 700-800 range, 5 to 8 touchdowns by year 2, if it's in one of the offenses that are in the back half of the round. Like Pickens in Green Bay, I could easily see him getting to that sort of thing by the end of year 2. So I don't know. I see both sides. I'm going to sit on the fence here, firmly on the fence.
So another question for you, because I'm kind of looking here, and I kind of want to equate this draft class to maybe the 2020 class a little bit. So Ruggs, Judy, Lamb, Jalen Reagor, Justin Jefferson, Brandon Ayuk, T. Higgins, Michael Pittman, Laviska Shenault, KJ Hamler, Chase Claypool. Like, that's the order that these guys went in there. Okay. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'm talking about 11 guys that went in the first 50 picks. So this is a pretty aggressive list of guys that I look at all these guys, and I think there was excitement, energy around basically all of these guys that we're just listing here. Like, there's a lot of optimism that some of these guys were going to pan out. There's belief that they could elevate themselves in the right situation to one of the best receivers or a very good receiver. I kind of feel my vibe about this class is very similar to some of these guys. So, I could see like I have some belief in like a Christian Watson and, some of these type of guys and Sky Moore, like an Alex Pierce. Like I have some belief that, Alex Pierce might be like the Jalen Hurd of this class. It was Jalen Hurd, no, or Gabriel Davis, someone like that. But that might be, that's not a bad example. But I think there's a big group of guys that you can very clearly see the path to success that you're talking about with Thielen, given the right situation. So like I have a higher belief in one of these guys, like some of these guys painting out. Maybe 6 is ambitious to your point, Maddie, but at the same time, like if you tell me Sky Moore's the best receiver in this class in 2 years, I'm not going to be stunned. And I don't think
let's bring it full circle though. Using the 2020 draft, where's George Pickens in that group of receivers you just watched as a prospect? Is he ahead of Jerry Jeudy as a prospect? No. Is he ahead of Justin Jefferson? No. Ahead of CeeDee Lamb? No.
I don't know. I'd like to go look at our draft
grades coming out at the time? No. Henry Ruggs at the time was better than Jameson Williams is now. So your number one wide receiver most likely is competing to be wide receiver 4 or 5 that year. Now, of that group, how many of them are high-end wide receiver 2s right now? What?
Well, I mean, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb. I mean, you can
Judy, T. Higgins. Well, we just hit 4, right? But we hit 4.
Michael Pittman.
Is he a high-end number 2?
He's no. I would look at what he did this year with
Darnell Mooney.
But now we're getting to the point where we're looking at guys that are putting up stats.
No, we're putting up production. 1,100-yard receiver.
We're putting up production based on getting ridiculous amounts of opportunity and not being that good of a player. But still, we're talking about 4 to 5 guys in a better wide receiver class. That's just why I thought that we were a little high with 6 to 7. A better wide receiver class, and that includes, it did include Henry Ruggs' unfortunate off-field things that takes him out of it. It's just, so to me, and how this gets into CLIFFS, if I'm looking at it, my personal top 4 wide receivers might not be exactly aligned with kind of what the consensus is. But if I'm looking at it and I'm like, okay, these are the guys that I think are going to make a difference by the end of 2023. Pickens, London, Jameson Williams, and I would have Chris Olave. So like I'm following the KCSN draft guide perfectly. But like after those 4, there's a pretty big drop off to me. And that includes, Garrett Wilson, who will already be gone before the Chiefs pick. But like that's the first cliff to me. I don't feel as comfortable with guys after that. So like that's the first place where I see a gap is after those 4 guys.
I would agree. I really would agree with that. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Craig. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I want to delve into that a little bit because we've had this conversation and we've all ping pong back and forth between should the Chiefs trade up for a wide receiver and should they not. And your level of comfort with acquiring one of these wide receivers is, you're probably not going to get one of these at 29. So we keep playing this ping pong game and literally like we are opposite sides all the time on where we stand on this. Is should the Chiefs trade up for wide receiver? I'm all the way off on the Chiefs trading up for wide receiver because I feel comfortable with that second tier of guy. But now we're sitting here and you're talking about a cliff after these 4. Do you feel comfortable, Matthew? And I'll start with Craig because I cut Craig off and I feel like a jerk. Do you feel comfortable giving up and giving up with this cliff and not getting one of these guys and making an aggressive move to acquire one to live in the second tier of these receivers then?
No, I'm fine with staying put. Like I'm fine with dealing in the second tier. I think the opportunity matters, and I think the shift in the offense is occurring. And so I am willing to see that out. I am also willing to live in the second tier and circling back around to the position very soon. Like, you can convince me to take one in round 1 and in round 3 because the Chiefs need dudes and they don't have long-term commitments to anybody. So I am perfectly happy with taking 2 swings, basically maybe let's call it tier 2 and tier 3 in the wide receiver class rather than trading up for one of the 4 tier 1 guys with Patrick Mahomes as your quarterback.
So for me, I don't want to trade up for a wide receiver unless it's specifically to jump pick. What are the Packers? 28?
22.
Unless it's just their second pick. Their first one they can have.
Yeah.
Whatever their next pick is. If they don't go wide receiver, there's one sitting there with I think it's 28. It could be 27. I forget which. But whatever it is, I'm okay with jumping that pick if there is one receiver from this group we just talked about, the Pickens, London, Jameson Williams, Olave group, or if you have a significant difference on your guys of this group, Treylon Burks, Sky Moore, Garrett Wilson. Those are the next three. Those three are in another group by themselves. I see, like we were talking about, I do see the path for those guys to be a number one wide receiver quickly in the NFL. I don't know if I expect it, but I can see the path in the right situation where it works and becomes pretty quickly. So if you're jumping just that 28th pick or whatever the Packers have to get one of them, one of these 7 names, then cool. Then I'm okay with it. I'm not okay with trading up, though, any farther than that. And especially if it's for one of the names I haven't mentioned yet. But like, I have a very clear second tier of wide receivers, and it's those 3 players. And then I think there's a pretty significant drop off that I wouldn't want anybody else until at least pick 50, if not 62 at wide receiver.
Yeah, I'm with that. And I'm fine with that. I mean, I'm fine with what it just, I don't want to forego future assets in a class that is deep, especially, I can agree with that. First 4 guys are gone. Just stay put. Take a guy. Let the rest of the board fall to you, because I feel pretty comfortable saying that day 2 of the wide receiver group is very strong. Like, I like a lot of the day 2 guys. So, I mean, we can move off of the day 1 cliff and onto the day 2 guys. I like a lot of the day 2 guys. I am very intrigued by a number of options, number of styles, a number of different guys. So I'm fine with missing on the upper tier, using that, because if the upper tier is gone, that means that you're probably getting a very good player at another position that you can definitely still invest in if you are the Chiefs, and circling back around and adding 2 guys in day 2 in a group that I feel is pretty deep. And I think that that's kind of the sweet spot of it, because it's kind of pick your flavor at that point and add multiple guys and be able to get quality play out of multiple guys.
And you can kind of play both sides of the coin there too. You can maybe you get a Sky Moore at, you get a Sky Moore in the second round at 50. He falls to you at 50. And then maybe you go get a guy that kind of plays a little bit more true X type above the rim. That there's something to be said there. You could probably get both you get both types of guys in this class and get a quality one for each kind of flavor. So how big do you think that group, that second tier is, Maddie? Like, how many guys are you looking at going, okay, there's a big cliff after who?
Oh, it's 3. So we talked about Pickens, London, Williams, Olave at the top. I have 3 guys next. It's Treylon Burks, Sky Moore, Garrett Wilson. Like, that's my second tier. And I think, like I said, I think there's a pretty big, after that group, I think you get into a lot of role players. I think all the receivers after that, especially through the majority of their first contract, at least the first half of it, are going to be very role specific players. And the Chiefs have those guys. Not saying they're not useful, but the Chiefs already have, that's what the Chiefs wide receiver room is currently. I think if the goal is for the Chiefs to be better on offense, they need a guy that becomes the go-to guy. They need a guy that you feel like is going to be that dude after that first, 7 receivers now. I don't know if there's any of those dudes. Like, that's my concern. If you're going to wait for the Chiefs, I get, maybe you can snag Jahan Dotson at pick 50 and then pair him with some size of David Bell later in day 2. Like, it makes a lot of sense. But I'm also afraid you're still just getting 2 more kind of one-trick ponies to fit into the offense without having a guy that's your go-to guy to help funnel your passing attack through.
I mean, the go-to guy in this instance would be Travis Kelce.
It's
always going to be. But, I do agree that they need another. They've had 2. They've had Tyreek and they've had Kelce. And again, like we said when he was traded, you are immeasurably worse. Like, it doesn't, unless you can get like this stud number 1 guy, you are immeasurably worse in the wide receiver room this year. Now, that being said, I'm taking some more chances on some guys. I'm not willing to forecast the entire draft to go up and get there because there are so many holes. So the idea of a Dotson and a David Bell, very intriguing to me, because I think David Bell's stock could not be lower than it is right now. And he, I think, is a quality functional, like, he might get on the field before Dotson for Andy Reid, just because he's that smart of a guy and understands route concepts and everything. He's never going to take the top off of a defense ever, but he's going to be a solid player. Like, I mean, I think he's a guy that plays significant snaps early, and then you can bring Dotson along, or you can bring a Christian Watson along, or you can bring a guy like this that's got a little more projection to them. Now, you're gambling, and we've seen how the gambles have worked with this team, specifically in the second round over the Veach era. Breeland speaks. Willie Gay Jr. We've seen McCole Hardman, Juan Thornhill. Sometimes it works, but none of those guys with these crazy super high ceilings, not talking about Breeland, with these other guys with these crazy super high ceilings, they haven't hit them yet. And we are 2 or 3 years into a lot of their tenures right now. Now, they picked 2 guys last year that appear to be, arguably their 2 best second-round picks, not guys that we would look at and say, oh, incredibly high ceiling or anything like that, or, positional value, whatever. But those other guys that they drafted, that they took those big swings on, they haven't formulated the way that you would hope. So give yourself that floor with a David Bell or something like that. Give yourself that ability. If you miss out on that, I think we all get into this habit where it's like, oh, just take the athletic guy. You'll teach him. Hasn't worked out as well as we'd hoped so far for the Chiefs.
Well, speaking of athletic guy, how close was Christian Watson in this cliff for you? Because I feel like you could make a case the way the pre-draft process has gone for Christian Watson that he could be in this second tier. I know you're pretty bullish on him, but I mean, is he even the next QB or next receiver off that list, or for you, Maddie? Or is it because I could feel pretty good about him in that second tier as a wide receiver 8-ish.
I think that there is a very good chance that he comes into the NFL and has a very specific role for his entire rookie contract and doesn't do much besides that. I don't think he plays very physical, and he's got the size for it, but he gets out physical by a lower level of comp while being at the very clearly the most talented team at that level of comp. And he still gets bullied at times by guys much smaller than him. I think there is some significant work to do in his routes, which is expected. Like, not getting overly critical about how someone's route running is going to be no matter where they come from, especially in FCS school. It's just, I could see there being a lot longer of a trajectory for him to become a wide receiver too than all those other guys. So he's definitely in that next tier down. Yeah, him and Dotson are probably at the top of it, but he's definitely in that next tier down, that third tier for me, to where I think they're going to be good, but role players. They are going to fulfill a specific, he's going to be like McCole Hardman, who's put up good stats, but it was a very clear, there was a very specific role that he's been filling for this entire rookie contract. Maybe he explodes this year at the end. It's just, I think Watson's going to be on that trajectory a little bit more. I think his hype's gotten a tad out of control because of the post-season circuit, and there's not a ton of film everybody can find on him, because once you go back and start looking through a lot of it, like, you get, okay, he looks like an FCS receiver a lot more than he did at the Senior Bowl.
There's moments for sure.
Yeah. I see people that are trying to compare him to Chase Claypool because the obvious size and athletic standards, like looking at his RAS and looking at his size, they could not be more different players when the ball's in the air. Chase Claypool is an absolute bully. So like I've seen people try and make that comparison. Oh, use him as a box out contested catch guy. He's not that. He's not that. And that's
he's a Z.
Claypool.
He's a Z.
Yeah, he's a Z. Yeah. Claypool has made his bones winning the ball in the air, catching those shot puts from Ben Roethlisberger. Like, that's where he's made his bones. Literal shot puts. So just, yeah, kill that one right now.
All right, so I got another question here because I'm looking where old Christian Watson. I consider him on the fringe, whatever. Mechie, maybe the top. This next cliff though. So this is one I want to know. We're gonna talk about that third cliff, or that second cliff, I guess. Right in between the second and third. Where does that draft start for them? Like, where does the draft start for the Mechies, for the Alec Pierces of the world? I guess we're classifying Jahan Dotson in that group. Kyle Phillips, David Bell. Like, are these guys all in that next? I mean, they're in that next tier for you, right, Maddie?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think now you get to a big group of guys that should be kind of, you're looking at a day two, and now it goes from, okay, I'm looking for this general type of, I'm looking for this receiver that can do these X things, plural. Now, and when you get to this point, you're looking for a guy that does this singular thing really well, and then you try to develop the rest. So that's where Watson's, Dotson's. I still love Wan'Dale Robinson. I know people have come off of him a little bit because the athletic profile wasn't what they thought. Alec Pierce. Like there's a bunch of guys in this next group. And I think these are guys that you're looking at the rest of day 2 that are all going to be really good at one specific thing. If you ask them to do it, one team might value them at pick 50. One team might value them on day 3. It all depends on what that one specific thing they do really well are. So at this range, I do start to lean towards the guys that I think do one specific thing great. Kyle Phillips' ability to separate from the slot. Jahan Dotson.
That seems like a good trait to have. I don't know.
Yeah.
You know.
Alec Pierce,
I think Kyle Phillips is going to be the guy that we just think like. Kyle Phillips is the guy who goes 12th of 15th in receivers, and he winds up having a phenomenal career in the right situation. So
yeah, I mean that's the range we're looking at. You're looking at a range on day 2 where these guys look for one specific thing. So like that's the next group for me. I don't know where it is for you guys, but like it's a much larger group because I can go down to what are we looking at here about wide receiver. I think about wide receiver 20 total. So like we went from wide receiver 7 to now about a wide receiver 20, where I think I can pick out all of these guys roughly in the KCSN draft guide. One way that I think they could win early on. So like it's a big group.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was referring to about the guys in day 2. That big bulk, like that's the bulk of it. Go get Alec Pierce and couple him with Kyle Phillips. Go get a couple different types, guys that are going to win one way, guys that aren't maybe going to have the same high ceiling as some of these other guys, but improve the floor of your wide receiver room significantly and try and lean on Travis Kelce, Juju Smith-Schuster, Marquez Valdes-Scantling to handle more of that role. Again, you're worse on offense than you were without Tyreek Hill, but you've got more young bodies. You've got cap savings from doing that. Make the moving on from Tyreek Hill count with multiple players rather than, trying to put all your eggs into one basket, unless, again, one of those top guys, falls off. But this is the group that I want to play in if I get to play in the wide receiver group.
Well, here's something interesting. Wide receiver 20 taken in that 2020 draft class that we were talking about, this big receiver 165. Or it was pick 165. Receiver 20 went 165th in that loaded wide receiver class that we're talking about. And I find that very interesting to me. Like you're saying, there might be value to catch at 120 where the Chiefs pick, or there might be some of these value. There might be value to catch down there at the receiver spot. I don't know if I feel comfortable about the Chiefs waiting that long to go grab a receiver. Like I'll be disappointed if they just wind up waiting to catch, Khalil Shakir at 121 or something crazy like that. But I'll be. Are you not okay? Are you okay? Are you okay if the only receiver the Chiefs take is Khalil Shakir, Craig?
No, not the only. No.
If
you're playing in that, you get to.
You've got to get. That's what I'm saying. You can't start your receiver group with that, but you can try to catch value on 4. And like I think that's what's going to be interesting to your point. You're talking about this big giant group of guys. They might be available with their last pick in round 4, and like you're right. If they maintain, like maybe that's the difference here. Instead of trading up for one of these wide receiver ones, maybe you're grabbing a tier 2 wide receiver. That first after that first cliff, and you're going and grabbing Treylon Burks, and then maybe you're going and grabbing Khalil Shakir instead of trading up for one of Olave, Williams, London, one of those kind of guys, because that's a guy that could fall to 121. 121 is probably what it takes to trade up above the Packers at 28. In fact, it is. I was kind of looking at the math. Like that's probably what it's going to take. It'll get you to 25 with Buffalo. So there's your strategy there.
Yeah, that's definitely the best route. I think the question I have though is, what if it's not the tier 2 of guys that and like I don't want to keep making everybody work off of my tiers here, but what if it's fine. Jahan Dotson? What if that's the best you can get at pick 50? It's Jahan Dotson. And then you come out with whatever other day 2 receiver you want to pick. Are you still happy with that? Or is it more of just, I can make it work? And can I make it work good enough for what this team is right now? Like at what point do the Chiefs not get enough wide receiver output from this draft class to you? Like, what does that pairing look like?
I mean, at that point, like with a Dotson, like I'm not the biggest Dotson fan, so like that's a tougher pill to swallow for me, just because of the type of receiver that he is. But I mean, I think roughly playing tier 2, tier 3, I can get on board with. 2 tier 3s, It depends on the player, and I could maybe get on board with it. Obviously, a tier 1, I get on board with it. But like,
Right.
I think generally tier 2, tier 3, I'm in with. I think that makes the team better, more so in the future here.
Like, I'm trying to figure out. It's like a Kyle Phillips and an Eric Ezekanma. Like, how do we feel? How do we feel about that?
Yeah,
no, not good at all.
And I like both those players too.
I like both of them too.
Yeah.
Now, I think there's a little bit of crossover in like where they win, not where they align, but like how they're going to win.
Right.
So like there's that issue. But no, I don't think that Kyle Phillips is probably the first of those two. I don't feel like he is good enough to make me feel good. Like it was essentially like that was the Cliff talk for me. Is once you the Chiefs need someone before tier 3. And if it is the tier 3 guy, at least make it Watson or Dotson at the very top of that group, because I do think they have the upside to break through before some of the others. Like it's a more worthwhile swing, but I would be very upset, not upset, but I would be nervous if we're assuming that Garrett Wilson goes early in the draft. If you get bashed Treylon Burks and Sky Moore, and like the only receivers you're left looking at are Watson and Dotson, I would be itching to almost overdraft them. And I don't love either one of them, but I think it's a little scary after that. Like if that's what you're relying on. So that's where I come from is if I'm the Chiefs, if I'm Brett Veach, I can't let Sky Moore, Treylon Burks, Garrett Wilson for me be off the board. Like they cannot get off the board without me taking one of them.
Yeah. And I get it because then after that, you're drafting a guy like Jalen Tolbert from South Alabama in day 2 and hoping that he can be your X. And again, we like some of the traits of Jalen Tolbert, and I think Andy Reid might like some of the traits of Jalen Tolbert, but he's a long ways away from being able to step into an NFL role and be a guy, be an X receiver at the NFL level. So everybody that you're talking about there, if you want a high upside guy, if you want a guy that could be a number 1, it's going to be years. And this team doesn't have years. So yeah, I'm with Matty because then at that point you're drafting singularly focused elemental guys at wide receiver at that point.
Well, and we talk about trade ups all the time, and we spend a lot of time talking about trade ups in round 1. Like we spend a lot of time going, let's see here. What could the Chiefs do? They could trade 29 and 30 and go all the way up for an edge. They could trade pick 50 and get into the middle round of the first, or middle of the first round, and all that stuff. But we were talking in a group chat yesterday, and I was just like, maybe we aren't talking enough about the Chiefs trading up to like pick 40 to grab the bottom of that 3 and 50 gets you up to about 40. And like, I wonder if that's where, maybe it's a Treylon Burks or something that's fallen there. Like that's the guy you go target at pick 40 and you still have 29 and 30 to go address, edge, corner. You kind of free those up and you can still go and grab one of those guys. I'm wondering, like we talk all the time about round 1. Maybe it's round 2 we should be paying attention to for a potential trade up for this team.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, from when I kind of start playing around with mock drafts, I do think there almost always is a safety, a wide receiver, or a defensive lineman. It could be tackle or end that I feel like is worth trading up 5-7 spots in round 2 from 50 up a little bit to make sure that you get them. So like, I do think that's a spot to keep your eyes on for the Chiefs to jump up, because I do think the Chiefs want to keep their 2 first-round picks or the option to have them. So, like, I think that as long as they don't trade for a player, they're going to have 2 ones. I wouldn't be shocked if they don't trade up in the first round, but to see them move up from 50 to get the last corner or defensive lineman or wide receiver left in a specific tier, I think it's a good spot. And I think once this draft hits 50, this isn't just a wide receiver thing. After pick 50, I think this draft's going to look a lot worse than it does before pick 50. It's not the strongest draft as is, but guys between number 7 and number 50 on your board are a lot closer than number 50 to 75. Like, I think it starts to fall off pretty quick after pick 50.
And that's where we've seen a lot of these wide receivers that have translated pretty quickly go in recent years. I mean, you think about T. Higgins going very early in day 2, Chase Claypool, Laviska Shenault, a guy that, maybe hasn't been the best dude in Jacksonville, but a guy that we would be excited about adding to the Chiefs, wide receiver room. Lots of guys like that could be impactful players and impactful additions to the wide receiver room, like our pals at Macadoodles are going to be an impactful addition to the Kansas City liquor scene. You heard me talk about it. elite customer service, elite selection, and terrific prices coming to Lee's Summit in summer of 2022. Let's get more of them in Kansas City, add more impactful places to buy your liquor in the Kansas City area or wherever. Get a hold of Roger, info@macadoodles.com. But yeah, that's where kind of the upper, middle tier of those contributors, as Maddie was talking about, those wide receiver 2+, let's call them that. Those types of guys have kind of gone early in day 2, and it has behooved a lot of teams to be in that upper range there. I don't know if trading up for that sort of thing would be a really big benefit for the Chiefs. Maybe trading back a little bit with like pick 30. Maybe the board didn't fall the way that you want, or maybe there's a ton of guys you like on the board. Try and trade back a little bit and try and catch some guys and add some more capital to the 12 picks that you've got. Okay, maybe I don't love that move, but
well, hey, look,
makes six.
Look, if you trade back, that gives you more flexibility to move up. Like you could go package. I mean, I know, like you could do a lot still. I mean, you still have ammo to go move around and maneuver the board a little bit. And like, I don't hate that idea either. So, like I think there's something to warrant. Like if the Chiefs trade out of one of those picks, they're not going to make 13 selections. Like they're just not. Like Maddie's dream, they'll trade all day 3 picks and just load up for like an extra. They'll load up for like an extra 3rd round pick or something like that.
Hey, listen, if they want to unload both 4th round picks and all the round 7s, they can absolutely get another day 2 pick, and we'll be cooking with fire here.
They could trade their 2 round 4s and their 4 round 7s to get to like pick 85. Like,
please.
Why are you guys taking Brett Veach's best day of the draft away from him? What do you have against Brett Veach's best day of the draft?
Give him more picks on his day 2. Okay, here's a question, hypothetically for you. You're sitting there at pick, it doesn't matter who you pick at 29, but you're sitting there, you're at 29, pick 30. You don't love any of your options, but you like a wide receiver and you like a corner, or you like a wide receiver and you like a defensive lineman. Which one are you going to take there to get the 5th-year option and secure, say you like them equally, and which one are you going to let ride to the 2nd round? Like, which player would you rather have? I guess the 5th-year option is all I'm trying to angle for here.
This is a defensive end or a defensive lineman?
Defensive end, defensive tackle, cornerback, wide receiver. Just which one do you want the 5th-year option? Now, you got to keep in mind, generally who's going to be available. Like if it's a defensive end, it's probably Boy Mafe is the guy we're talking about. If it's a receiver, Pickens is quite commonly available around here, so maybe it's him. Maybe it's Treylon Burks. Corner, Kyer Elam. Defensive lineman, Travis Jones. Like if those are your options, like which 5th-year option is the most appealing to you?
It's the wide receiver, and I realized that I ignored all of the defensive stuff, but it's the wide, because that's where the depth is.
Look,
and the end of the 1st round there, and it sucks because I want my defense to be better. But yeah,
that's because defense doesn't matter. That's really the answer. Let's look at what's happening in the wide receiver market. Like I think there's going to be a market correction too, but like that's the thing I'm keeping an eye on here. It's like the wide receivers you can get at 29 and 30 have a good chance of being a guy worth getting good money in the future. Your edge boy, Mafe probably doesn't have the ceiling of a guy that is going to garner top edge money in 4 years. But George Pickens, we'll call it George Pickens, he could. I'd rather have the 5th-year option on a guy like him because I think the wide receiver hit rate, it's a weird market because the wide receiver market, my wide receivers are getting paid. The wide receiver market is accelerating at an alarming rate. Also, you're seeing a ton of 2nd-round receivers that are paid too, like the A.J. Browns and the Deebo Samuels of the world and the DK Metcalfs of the world. So it's like, is it a devalued position? No. Is there value to be had? Yes. Another thought. Sorry, I know I'm going all over the place, but I wonder if how crazy the wide receiver market is now affects how many wide receivers are taken earlier too. That's another.
That's where I wanted to go next. It was like I think you're going to start seeing this come from like the way where people justify taking a running back in round 1 is kind of like, well, you're just going to use them for those first 5 years and you're going to let them go because you're not going to be the one to pay him again. Is wide receiver going to start being seen the same way, especially as that money climbs? Like it's clearly a huge impact, but what teams besides the Bills want to pay a wide receiver $6 million a year, no matter how good they are? Nobody does. Like the competing teams don't want to do that right now. So as long as it works out for the Chiefs, the Packers, teams that are doing this, why are you not going to take them in round 1 to get that 5th-year option to elongate the amount of control you have on them? Why might that not be a shift that you start to see? And to your point earlier, I think the NFL tried to do this weird correction where they're like, oh, hey, we're throwing the ball more now, but it's all about spacing and the spread. What if we don't value wide receivers in round 1? What if we just get them in round 2 and let our quarterback and our schemes get them open? And it worked. But now all of a sudden, you're kind of starting to see that go back the other way now, though. I mean, Jamar Chase, really darn good round 1. Justin Jefferson, really darn good round 1. CD, you could pick out round 2 guys, obviously. Yeah. I just wonder if you're getting a recorrection from so many teams for a little stretch there after that Julio Jones big trade up, saying like, wait, maybe this doesn't work, even though, I mean, it clearly did. Julio's great. But like, it's just, I wonder where the correction is now. Are we still on day 2 wide receivers, or day 1 wide receivers coming back in favor now as the successes keep piling up? I don't know.
I mean, if 8 wide receivers want to go off the board before pick 29, and a defensive end or something like that wants to just land in the
that's George's music.
I'm not gonna be mad. Oh, buddy, I'm not gonna be mad at that. I'm really not gonna be mad at that. So, like, I'm fine with either one of these theories. Either ignore them completely, or just take all of them before it gets to the Chiefs pick.
One or the other. And that's going to do it for the KC Laboratory. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you to my dear, lovely friends here for joining us.
Dorks.
We'll catch you later.
Make sure to call us dorks.